Hey everybody, Steve here. So I've been making a ton of videos on all the different notation applications that are out there. If you want, you can check out this playlist to see them all. And I think at this point I've kind of covered most of the more popular ones, or at least the most well-known, along with a couple other little curiosities that I ran into. But today we're actually going to talk about a really interesting one that I hadn't really heard about until I started this research, which is Forte. And it turns out that I actually have a lot to say about it. Now, as I've mentioned, I hadn't heard of Forte before setting out on this journey to find a replacement for Finale, but I'm always excited to try out a brand new application, and especially if it's one that's maybe less popular or underrepresented in the industry, because as I've mentioned in other videos, you can be sometimes pleasantly surprised by applications like that. And after using it for a little while, it turns out I have a ton to say about it. So if you're a Forte user or maybe someone thinking of switching notation applications, like say from Finale, I recommend sticking around to the end because I have a ton of questions and I also need maybe some second opinions. But anyway, let's jump into it. So the very first thing I want to mention here is it was pretty hard to dig up any good information about Forte. Searching for it by name online usually gave some other results, either related to the musical term Forte or how to insert a Forte dynamic marking into another application, as you can see here. I can think of a couple reasons this might be the case. First of all, Forte is a German-made application by this company, whose name I won't even try to pronounce. As you can see, a lot of the info about this company is only in German, which I do not speak. So you may have better results than I did if you actually live in Germany, but for me it was a little bit tricky. This actually kind of foreshadows a problem I ran into later, so put a pin in that for now. As with a lot of other applications, there are a few different versions of Forte, some of which limit how many instruments or staves you can have. And like with all the others, I went with the full version, or premium as they call it. I will say that the price point for Forte is a lot less than a lot of the other applications I've tried out, which is great. And unlike applications like Sibelius and Dorico, this price is generally more in line with what I think a product like this should cost. And I know that's not how economics works, I just wanted to give my opinion. One thing that caught me a bit off guard is there doesn't seem to be a version of Forte for Mac, which is kind of surprising considering the amount of musicians and composers who primarily use Apple products. This wasn't a problem for me since in general I prefer to use these kind of applications on PC anyway, but it does sort of isolate Forte from a large portion of the industry. For example, there's an option in Forte to export a score directly to a DAW, but not having support for Mac doesn't allow this for Logic Pro, which is a huge chunk of the DAW market share. It seems like they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot here by only supporting PC. So first off, one thing I can say I liked was this notice informing you of the two different notation modes, simple and expert. I like this idea for an application like this since it recognizes there can be a varying familiarity with music notation among different users, something I wish other applications had as well. I bounced around a bit between them, but ended up mostly sticking with the expert mode just because I needed a few extra features I couldn't find in the simple mode. So I'm probably going to sound like a broken record here, but once again, there isn't a jazz lead sheet template in Forte. I can't really fault Forte for this since most other applications don't have this either, but I mean, come on, why not? Now sure, most lead sheets in jazz are between 16 and 32 bars, so a blank or single staff template would probably do just fine, but I'm kind of shocked that basically none of the other applications I've used so far have a standard AABA lead sheet template. I mean, come on, a barbershop quartet template, but no lead sheet template, really? Someone is going to have to explain this to me. I can't imagine I'm the only person out there who regularly needs to put lead sheets together, am I? Something interesting about Forte that I noticed right away was how familiar the interface looked. It sort of reminded me of a cross between Finale and Sibelius, and since I had some experience with both of those applications, overall I found it pretty easy to find everything I needed. The top menus here are similar to how Sibelius organizes things, but a lot of the score layout menus like this are really close to Finale's page layout tool, even having a measures per system and systems per page option here, something that I pointed out other applications sort of lack. There are a few other little things that remind me of Finale as well, but I'll get to those in a second. But overall, I would go as far as saying that Forte's interface is the closest to Finale's out of all the other applications I've used. And this is actually kind of a bummer because it would have really been in Forte's best interest to lean into this fact more after it was announced that Finale was being discontinued. The developers could have advertised Forte as a quick and easy switch from Finale, but as far as I know, this didn't happen. Instead, Dorico was announced as sort of the official replacement for Finale. And as I mentioned in my video on it, I like Dorico, but it is so different from Finale that I question how easy a switch it would be for most Finale users. The fact that Forte is a lot cheaper than both Dorico and Sibelius would have helped a lot too, I think. It just kind of feels like a bit of a missed opportunity for Forte, if you ask me. Now, as I was saying, setting up the first score, a standard jazz AABA lead sheet, went pretty smoothly since, as I mentioned, a lot of Forte's menus were really close to Finale's, which is great. Unlike some other applications I've made videos for, I didn't have any trouble adjusting the page margins or resizing the staffs. You can even add or remove page and bar numbers in the same menu here, which is really great, I think. Also, I really like the ability here to adjust the different fonts for everything in the score. That's a really cool idea, and since I didn't love the default Forte font, I did spend some time playing around with some others and came to a bit of a balance in the end. As far as page setup goes, I think Forte might have my favorite way to do it out of any other application I've tried so far, although there's one minor problem which I will get to in a minute. And similar to Sibelius, Forte also uses a movable panel with a lot of the main score elements here. I was able to find pretty much everything I needed in this panel, including rehearsal markings and repeats. Overall, I found it really easy to use and have to give credit for how it included most of the common things needed when making a chart like this. Also, as I mentioned before, Forte did a few little things very similar to Finale, and one I appreciated was being able to switch between notes and rests by hitting the R key, just like how it was in Finale. This is a really minor thing, I know, but little things like this just further illustrate my point that Forte could have and maybe could still be advertised as a really close alternative to Finale users. Now, before we go any further, I have to address one huge thing that in my opinion is Forte's biggest disadvantage. The biggest gripe I have with this application is it seems to be incredibly unstable. I had multiple crashes throughout my time using it, and I have to admit it became really frustrating after a while. I got several different messages and I'm not really sure what the cause of it all was or if I had maybe set something up wrong. I even tried to reinstall and still had it happen multiple times. These frequent crashes maybe would be more acceptable if Forte was a free alternative, but if you ask me, it's honestly unacceptable for a paid consumer product. But in the end, I was able to get the first chart done despite the constant crashing. However, I did run into a bit of an issue with slash notation. As far as I can tell, there just isn't a way to do this in Forte, although I may have missed something, and if so, please let me know either in a comment or send me a message on Instagram. As I've said before, when I'm trying out one of these applications, I try to rely just on the interface itself and not look up anything online if I can. When I do run into an issue I just can't find or figure out, then I will sometimes do a search for a possible solution. And as far as I can tell, there just isn't a way to create slash notation in Forte. I was able to figure out a sort of workaround though. You can change the note heads of notes. So in the end, I basically swapped all the heads out for slashes and then minimized the stems so it kind of resembles slash notation. Looks pretty close, but unfortunately not perfect since some of those stems are still visible. Again, if anyone can help me out here, I would really appreciate it. Now, having to deal with the slash notation thing brings me to my other really big issue with Forte, which is its documentation, which to be honest is not great. In fact, when searching for that issue specifically, there wasn't a single resource that came up online. Kind of surprising since it's an incredibly common thing in jazz and contemporary arranging. The Forte user manual did pop up as the first result, but as you can see, it's 349 pages long, which I am just not going to comb through to find something that should have a really simple solution. Again, since Forte is a German-made application, this could be more of a language issue than anything else. It's possible there is a ton of online documentation that just hasn't been translated to English yet, and maybe because of that, Google is removing a lot of the relevant results. I don't really know for sure. In either case, I think Forte really needs to improve their online presence. As you can see here, searching for that application and a simple task gives you a ton of results from other applications instead of what you're really looking for. Even the Forte knowledge base seems to be missing a lot of basic information on common notation practices, which I think should really be improved as well. And if anyone watching this lives in Germany, I'd be really curious to hear if you have a different experience searching in German from what I had while searching in English. Because of all this, I was a little nervous starting the next task, which is a more complicated solo transcription with a lot of complex features and more detail, but I decided to give it a try anyways. The good news is, in the end, I was able to get it done, but still had to deal with the occasional crashes while doing so. There was actually something about this bar here that really caused Forte some headaches. I'm not totally sure what happened, but I originally entered the notes to look like this, but somehow it got corrupted to look like this. Anytime I tried to go in and fix it, the application would crash. I ended up having to straight up delete this whole measure and insert a new one and start over. I'm still confused as to what happened, but maybe if someone out there knows, they could enlighten me. Another small thing I couldn't figure out was how to place a parenthesis around a note, something that I have had issues with in other applications. But in Forte, it seems like it should be easy since you have this really cool note head menu here, something that I thought was a great idea, but still no parenthesis. Again, I tried to look this up online, but no luck in the documentation. A couple things I will give Forte though are rehearsal markings, which were easy to find and placed exactly where I wanted them. You can easily choose between numbers and letters as well, or even song sections, which I think is really great too. Also, adding ties, articulations, and changing bar lines were all really easy to find and just something I wanted to give Forte credit for. Like most other applications I've used, Forte didn't let me spell my chords any way I wanted. So minor chords spelled this way weren't allowed and I had to change them to this. I've brought this up before in other videos just as sort of a minor annoyance I have. And while there is usually an option somewhere to change this behavior, it seems like only MuseScore just lets you spell chords how you want without any fuss. Not really sure why other applications haven't picked that up yet. Also, I had a bit of an issue changing some of the chord names to another enharmonically equivalent one. For example, this chord here should really be C flat 7, but Forte wouldn't let me call it that for whatever reason. Again, if there's an easy way to do this that I have missed, please let me know. I didn't really have any trouble with chord extensions, which is nice, but you can also see a bit of that chord spacing issue I mentioned before. You can move them around to make them look a bit better, but I really wish it would just auto-format like in some of the other applications I've tried. The solution in Forte is to use this little positioning function here, but I would much rather just be able to drag them manually if it were possible. Okay, so I'll admit, by the time I got to the third task here, which is a small section of a full big band chart, I was getting a little worried. As I mentioned, Forte had been pretty unstable when just working with a single staff, so I was curious to see how it would handle a score with 18 instruments on it. The good news, or maybe the bad news if you want to look at it that way, is that there wasn't too much of a difference in the actual stability of the application. I still had regular crashes and actually the same type of crashes, but nothing more or less that I hadn't experienced before. I'm not sure if I did anything wrong here, and as I mentioned, I did try and reinstall Forte, but ended up having the same issues as before. But if anyone knows a fix to the constant crashing, I would really like to know. Unlike for the lead sheet, Forte did have a big band template, which was nice, although it was kind of set up a little weird. Again, this might be more of a thing in Germany, but typically a jazz big band will have a trombone section, either 4 trombones or maybe 3 and a bass trombone. But in this template, there was only a single trombone, which was grouped with the other horns. This kind of confused me, but luckily Forte made it pretty easy to add or remove instruments, so I was able to add the other things I wanted. Although one thing I couldn't figure out is why the different text sizes for the different instrument names here. I looked everywhere for a way to fix this, but came up empty-handed. And again, I looked around in the documentation, but couldn't find much info. So I ended up just leaving it, which was a bit disappointing. Also, since I couldn't find a way to remove the bass staff from the piano part, it would be nice to see an option for a single staff piano when adding a new instrument. This can kind of depend on the arrangement you were doing, but it would be nice to have the option. Now, in the end, I was able to get this task done, but not without a lot of headaches, most of which I think could be easily solved and kind of baffled me if I'm being honest. As I mentioned, setting the page margins and system spacing was really easy in Forte using this menu here. The problem is anytime I either reloaded the file, which remember I had to do multiple times after the constant crashing, all that work on setting up the page would be reset, meaning I had to set it up all over again. I have no idea why this would be the case. It just kind of seems like for whatever reason, Forte doesn't save a lot of these kinds of changes to the score, which was pretty frustrating. There are also a lot of smaller things that started to add up after a while. Some of these are hard to explain. For example, for whatever reason, Forte kept changing the enharmonics of a lot of the notes I'd entered. So I would be working on another part of the score and realize an F here had been changed to an E sharp, which is not something I would do unless necessary, which in this key it really isn't. There were other things too, like ties randomly disappearing and note rhythms changing. It felt like it kind of happened randomly, and I don't have a good explanation as to why, so any help would be appreciated. A couple of other really little things, like not having automatic courtesy accidentals in situations like this. And finally, Forte does this really weird thing where copying one or a group of measures to another doesn't replace the notes in the new measure. Instead, it just adds the notes to the one you're trying to copy to. That seems really weird to me as a default behavior, and I struggle to understand why it would be the case. I'm assuming there is a key command to replace the entire measure, but in my opinion, it really should be the other way around. One nice thing I can say is entering drums into Forte was pretty easy. At least for what I was trying to do, Forte didn't bother me with a lot of different voices for the different drums. Things just sort of looked the way they should, which I did appreciate. Although again, I was having some issues with keeping things like the note heads and the format consistent across saving and reloading, and sometimes even just within the same session. So for example, I wanted the hi-hats to have an X note head, which was really easy to do in this menu here, but every once in a while, Forte would just change it back for reasons I still don't really understand. This actually happened so many times, I eventually just waited until I was done the whole part to change each note head and made sure to save right after that. This seemed to keep things consistent, at least for the time being anyways. Again, I'm not sure why things work this way, but little things like that do add up to a way more frustrating experience. And it seems like a pretty easy thing to fix in a future release, but I'm not a developer, so maybe someone else can shine some light on that. And finally, lyric entry was really easy, which was great. I like this lyric window here, although I did have to spend some time customizing the spacing with this little symbol here, but that wasn't too big of a deal. Again, you can kind of see the issue with slash notation here. I really wish there was a better way to do this in Forte, and if there is, please let me know. This does look fine from afar, but I think it would look a lot worse in person on a piece of actual paper. Not to mention that these slashes are now actual notes and not just a visual thing, so they would actually play back when listening to your score, which is not ideal. So whenever I'm making a video like this, I always try to approach every application with an open mind and also try to be as fair as I can. For me personally, I'm a really big fan of the fact that there are so many different options out there for musicians to choose from. And I think that having all those options really helps strengthen our industry as a whole. And it's for this reason that I'm kind of bummed out that I had such a hard time using Forte. As I mentioned, using it felt very intuitive and familiar. And I do think that they're missing out on a bit of an opportunity here. With a few improvements to the stability of the application, along with maybe some tweaks to the interface, I really think it could appeal to a lot of Finale users like myself who haven't quite decided what they're going to do just yet. And this is something I would really like to see because while Finale is still currently usable, that's probably not going to be the case forever, especially considering the death of Windows 10 here on the horizon in a few weeks. So if it's possible, I would really recommend that Forte get on it and go after those users because I really do think it has the potential to be a good alternative. As it stands now, though, I don't think I could recommend it to anyone until some of the issues I brought up are addressed. Some of the things I went through using it, like the constant crashing, is just unacceptable, frankly, in a paid application. I would still be upset if it happened in a free application as well, and despite Forte's lower price point, I still think it's the biggest issue I had overall. So as for a rating, I think I'm going to give Forte a 3 out of 10. I was able to get everything I tried to do done, but the constant stability issues and the lack of documentation really hurt the overall experience. And this is especially frustrating because, at least to me, this seems like two of the easiest things to sort out. And as I mentioned, I didn't have any issues with the overall design of the application or note entry or anything like that. It was just the weird behavior and the lack of information that made things really hard for me. So my advice to Forte, for whatever it's worth, is number 1, fix the stability issues and the constant crashing. Number 2, improve the online documentation and Forte's overall online presence. Number 3, make it available for Mac. And number 4, tweak some of those minor interface issues I had so I don't have to redo everything when I save and reload a project. And if Forte is able to address some of those issues in a future update, I think I'll come back and give it another shot and maybe make another video about it. Because as I mentioned, I think there's a lot of potential here that's kind of being unrealized. But anyways, thanks so much for watching and see you soon.